This is chapter one for social studies, grade 9. What is the structure of Canada's federal political system is what we're going to be talking about in this little mini lecture here. It starts with the Canada's political system starts with Canada's constitution. So it's, sorry, um, Canada's constitution started in 1867 with John A. Macdonald, and John A. and was English at the time, and the English and the French kind of came together and decided on how upper and lower Quebec or up and lower Canada were going to be ruled at the time. So there was still the king at the top, sorry, and the French and the English had to come together and agree on what kind of a system and who was going to be in power and how they were going to elect those people in power, and that's what they agreed to in 1867. So John A. Macdonald was the English prime minister, the very first prime minister, and he was instrumental in that discussion. So again, that year was 1867. So it also outlines the basic political rights, like the freedom of speech. So it guaranteed basic rights to all of its citizens. So that's the Canadian Constitution in 1867. 1867. Charter of Rights and Freedoms on this one down here. Now this came about in 1982. Now, the spearhead was a whole bunch of people, but mostly the Liberal Party and Pierre Trudeau. Pierre Trudeau is linked to this one. It guarantees certain rights and freedoms, such as discrimination against race, age, sexual orientation, which was not guaranteed in the Constitution. It made it a part of the Constitution. Well, the Charter of Rights and Freedoms is a separate document, but it's treated like the Constitution. And it's been accepted by the Queen as well. So it's not just a series of laws that we can overturn. This is a second constitution or a group of amendments that will, moving forward, will protect people that the original constitution overlooked. For instance, you're not allowed to not hire somebody just because they're too old and you're trying to go for a younger look. They have to be lacking some skills, or you're not allowed to hire somebody because they're too young, just because if they have the certain qualifications. If somebody's 21 and you look at them and you think it would just look better if that person was older, but they were qualified for it, you're not allowed to use age primarily and only as the only reason to not hire that person. The second part, this is the overview of Canada's political system. So at the very top is the monarch of Britain, or the crown. So over here, sorry, that was not good. What is happening? Sorry. The monarch of Britain, right here, is the head of Canada, and that was, we've got, of course, Queen Elizabeth over here. We've got next in line would be Prince Charles, who's not pictured, and then Prince William. And then if he dies, the crown goes to this little one right here, Prince George. So Prince George, when he's 18, can rule. Until then, somebody will have to rule in his place, maybe his mother, maybe his uncle, maybe something like that. But until he's 18, but right now it goes Queen, and then Prince Charles, and then Prince Williams, this man right here, and then this baby right here is the next, will be the ruler of Canada, of all of the Commonwealth. Now, in Canada, he's represented by the Governor General, who is David Johnston. So David Johnston is the current Governor General. Now, this changes every now and then, but right now, Governor General, he has the final say on all the laws and everything that we do in this country. He has to put the final stamp too, and he represents the Queen, just so the Queen doesn't have to look through different laws, and she has other things that she has to do in her country, so the Governor General can represent her in this country. The executive branch is another branch of government. Now, the executive branch in Canada oversees most things like the budget, the foreign affairs, etc., etc., etc. The military is all controlled by the executive branch. Now, for the most part, the executive branch introduces most laws and bills into the House of Parliament or House of Commons and the Senate. Now, the House of Commons and the Senate make up the legislative branch. The House of Commons is where the members of Parliament. Now, the members of Parliament are elected. This is very important. Members of Parliament are elected. However, in the Senate, they are appointed. So the Senate is different than the House of Commons. However, they have very, very similar roles. Both can introduce bills, but again, mostly the bills come from the executive branch. Now, that does not mean only the bills come from the executive branch. The House of Commons oversees money, but other than that, they're interchangeable for this course. Okay? The Senate can introduce bills. The House of Commons can introduce bills. There are 3 readings here, and we'll get to this here. There are 3 readings needed here. Once it passes 3 readings on this side, it goes to this side, and they have to approve 3 readings here. If it starts in the House of Commons, then it needs to pass 3 readings in the House of Commons, and then it goes to the Senate. And the Senate reads the bill 3 times. Now, if you're trying to pass a very, very liberal bill as a very, very first order of business as a newly elected liberal government, you would have to pass that through the House of Commons. Now, if you own a majority, that would pass very quickly. However, if you move it to the Senate, and the Senate is very conservative at the time, they're going to slow it down. It needs to be run 3 times and then passed 3 times. It can be defeated in the Senate, which means it's not going to be a bill. And once it's passed 3 times in each, by like the same wording on both sides, then it goes back to the Governor General, and then it gets signed. Now, once that bill is signed and it's made a law, it then goes down and can be challenged by the Supreme Court. Now, if you had a law like you're not allowed to say the word blue or Quebec sucks, then if they pass that law, it would go all the way up. You can challenge that law all the way up to the judicial branch, which is the Supreme Court. Sorry, I forgot completely right then. The Supreme Court, which is made up of 9 judges. So there's 3 from Quebec, 3 from Ontario. It's in your book if you really want to know. It's not important how many each area gets, but each area gets a certain amount of people. But the judicial branch, if Stephen Harper introduces a bill and it goes here and it says you're not allowed to say Quebec sucks, and then the House of Commons passes it 3 times, and then the Senate reads it 3 times and agrees that both not allowed to say Quebec sucks, and then the Governor General says not allowed to say Quebec sucks. It comes down here and can be challenged in court because one person says Quebec sucks. And then it gets, so they get charged and they go through the legal system, goes all the way up to the judicial branch. The judicial branch says, because of free speech, you're not allowed to make that law. They come back and they say that is no longer a law in Canada. The process has to start again. If they say yes, that is a law, then that process continues to go. If Stephen Harper wants to amend that law, he can do so, but he has to again start another bill. I hope this is a lot of, you understand all the drawing here. Let's go to the next slide. This is the same thing, and it explains it in a very similar way. The governor's system. Now, the Queen is at the very top here. The legislative branch, which is the Senate and the House of Commons. The executive branch is sort of outside, but it's also tied to the House of Commons. The legislative branch is the Senate and the House of Commons. It makes up the legislative, the executive branch, the Prime Minister, and the Cabinet. The judicial branch is the Supreme Court of Canada. And then we have federal courts as well as provincial courts. Okay? So I hope that's pretty clear. We've spent 10 minutes on it. So Minority versus majority government. Minority is if you have less than 50% of the seats, opposition, and this is your party, then you can't pass bills without some people of the opposition supporting your bills. Usually when it's a minority government, you have to be a little bit more cautious, and you have to be open to their suggestions, because if you're not open to another person's suggestion or another party's suggestions, you'll never have their support. Therefore, your bill will never pass. If you have a majority government, and this is your party, this is the opposition party has no power to stop you as long as your party agrees to vote the same way. Now, if your party agrees to vote the same way, that means the opposition, if they vote 40%, it's still less than 50%. So they don't win. Your bill will pass every single time. That's the difference between a minority and majority government. Now, minority governments and majority governments usually only happen, majority governments happen most of the time. Minority governments often happen in times of transition. In times of transition between governments, usually the Canadian people, and this is just in past years, usually Canadian people don't like to make switches really quickly. They like to slowly move from party to party. Because there's only truly been Liberals and Conservatives in the House of Commons, in different kinds of Conservatives and different kinds of Liberals, but really only Liberals and Conservatives. But it's flipping back and forth we don't like to do too often and too quickly. So it's usually a major issue, like a sponsorship scandal, or if it's wartime, and if conscription, if they want to talk about conscription, that's usually where government's flipped. If it's only about a bill, usually it doesn't happen. Right now, in government, there's 308 seats. Next election, there will be 333 seats, or sorry, 338 seats. So they're adding 30 seats so that they, just to better represent the people. Based on population, that they decided that it was time to increase the seats. Again, minority governments fall very easily just because of they don't have the clout, and they don't have the majority to pass all their bills. So when they get a controversial bill up there, if the other side, if there's not enough negotiation, or if that bill just wasn't changed so much, the opposition will actually vote them out and force election, which can't happen until the majority, or in a majority government, because the majority believes, or the majority won't lose the bill on their own. So they decide when to call an election for the most part. The next part, the MPs and the parties. Now, MPs and parties is a tricky situation here, because members of parliament are voted as individual. However, all usually belong to a party. You can run as an independent, but you usually belong to a party. Now, if you belong to a party, usually you vote the way that party votes. If you strongly disagree with what they've done, or you disagree with what they're saying, and or maybe they kick you out of the party, you maintain your seat in parliament because you're voted as an individual, not as a member of a party. So the party does not hold that seat. You as the individual hold that seat. This caused some concern, because if you're conservative and you flip to the Liberal side and then give the Liberal the majority, or you take a majority away from the Conservatives, that's a huge thing. That's a really big issue. Even if you're a Liberal going back to the Conservatives, you're still, the people of your area thought that you were a Liberal, and they voted you in as such. Now, if your values haven't changed and you feel that the Liberal Party has changed that much, that's why it's believed that the person should stay there, and not just the party. The party doesn't hold the seat. It's the actual person that holds the seat. Great in theory, but it's still up for a debate. Constituents make up an area, and they're the ones that vote for the MPs. So they vote for the MPs. Now, the MPs then go and act on their own volition, and they come back and they sometimes ask for the constituents opinion on how do you think we should vote for this and this and this, but that's very time. It's a very expensive process, and it takes a lot of time, and it's not really feasible. So the MPs don't often ask the constituents about anything unless it's very, very controversial, and then usually they just vote for the way the party goes. The constituents, if they're not happy with that PC, or with that, sorry, with the MP, they can always vote them out the next election, but during that election they're kind of stuck with them. This is called responsible government, where you're responsible to the people. They can't just make the MP can't make decisions based on whatever they want, and thinking that there's no repercussions in the future. There are repercussions, and those repercussions will be that the constituents will not vote you back into office. That's responsible government, where MPs have a responsibility to the constituents, and the constituents will believe that they will be represented in their best interest when they go to Parliament. And finally, this is how a bill is passed. Now, there are, like I said before, passing a bill, if it was introduced in the House of Commons, the first reading, the second reading, usually the first and the second reading happens immediately, but the first and the second reading happens right away, and they vote on them right now. So is this a bill that we want to continue to debate about and study, or is this a bill that shouldn't be in the House of Commons, and this is a waste of our time? So the first reading, they'll introduce the bill. The second reading, they'll talk about the bill. They'll again vote. If they vote to reject the bill, it gets kicked out right then. They study the bill. When they study the bill, they accept the bill. It goes to a committee stage, and that committee stage, and this FAA was proposed on April 11th. They had 28 meetings, 129 witnesses, recommended 116 amendments, which is changes. So they came up and they said it went back to the MPs, and the MPs voted further 22 amendments. So out of the 116 that were recommended, 22 were taken into account. So by the third reading, they took into 22 different bills. Now, it's passed. If it fails right then, it comes back, and you can see down here, if it's rejected then, it's out. It's done. It has to go back to the first reading. First reading, second reading, again, the report stage, third reading. But if it passes that third reading, it goes to the Senate. Now, when the Senate, they will have, again, the first reading and then the second reading and the vote. Again, if they accept the bill, it goes right to the third reading. If they want to study the bill, it goes to a committee stage. This, again, 21 meetings, 237, 156 amendments. So that's a total of 272 amendments that were recommended. The House of Commons eventually accepted 20 of them. So out of the total, there was 42 out of the 272 that were recommended. 22 or 42 were eventually put into the bill. So again, first reading, second reading, third reading, they both have to agree on the same wording of the same bill. So if they accept some and it comes back and they say, no, you still have to accept this, and they say no, and then it keeps on going back like this, okay, accept some, you can reject all, which means you reject the bill. You can reject all here, which means you reject the bill. You can accept all and just say, yes, whatever you want, we like it. They can accept all, but again, the wording has to be the same on all of it. Once it's the same, it's passed in both, and it goes to our Governor General. The royal consent is given, or royal assent is given, and it becomes a law. I hope that makes sense. 20-minute video, that's not awful. Bye.